Welcome to Books in the World, a literary interview program produced by Cape Media and the Cape Cod Writers Center. Books in the World has enjoyed more than 4 decades of cable television broadcasting, making it the nation's longest-running show of its kind. I am your host, Kathy Aspden. Today, I'm here with author Lynne Reeves. Lynne is a nationally recognized family counselor and a novelist. Her short fiction, essays, and articles have appeared in numerous national publications, such as Psychology Today and Solstice Literary Magazine. She is the author of The Dangers of an Ordinary Night, a suspenseful novel surrounding a dysfunctional family and a full-of-secrets community that claims to be seeking the truth. But today, we are here to talk about her newest novel, Dark Rivers to Cross, published by Crooked Lane Books in November of 2022. A psychological thriller and a domestic suspense novel, Dark Rivers to Cross is an emotional and thrilling story, says Catherine McKenzie, U.S. Today's best-selling novelist of I'll Never Tell. Lynne, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So the synopsis is hard on a thriller and a psychological piece where you don't want to set out any spoilers. And it's 2 words. If you said 1 or 2 words, it would put spoilers in there. So I'm always careful with that. But the overview of your book is that it's about a woman who's trying to protect her family, the basic. And she's lived through some trauma. And she has 2 sons who also have their own secrets and mysteries. She has gone from Boston to Maine. She's in the backwoods of Maine, really, at a camp, right? That is,
yes,
or a resort camp. So tell me exactly what the driving force is of the storyline.
So as a family counselor who also writes fiction, it was really important for me to set this story in a harsh wilderness so that we could really examine in a family what happens when there's an event or series of events that happen and how do they impact each person differently. So it's really an exploration of nature and nurture in a multitude of ways. Nature, the actual environment that they're living in, but also how the boys are hardwired. One boy really wants to be, and I say boy, but they're young adults, wants to be where he is, and the other one does not, and longs for answers that he doesn't have, that his mother is not willing to share with him. And it's really an exploration of what happens when parents are withholding trauma stories from their children, and what impact does that then have on the family unit, on the connection between parent and sons, and then what happens to each of the boys as they try to uncover or not uncover what she's holding.
In this particular story, she's the one holding the secret. And one boy is okay with that.
That's right.
He's at home in his environment. He loves what he's doing. He doesn't feel any need to knock over the apple cart. And the other son is grasping and wanting to know. And what else is it about my life? And what has she told them so far that we're allowed to know as a reader right from the start?
She's told them that they're adopted and that they are not biological brothers, but that they came as a package deal. So there's a beautiful section in there where one of the sons says to the other, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you, because when she came to adopt you, you held tight to my hand and she took both of us. And so there is a connection between the sons that is very, very strong, but as you said, one appreciates being in this rough and rugged landscape, and one does not. And we get to try to figure out over the course of the story whether or not that's because the secret is holding him back from knowing his true self, or whether or not it's just the fact that she's distant from them. And the reason why Lena is distant from her sons is because there's a fear on her part that if she fully opens up to them, she will tell them these things.
Right.
And she doesn't think that's the right thing to do.
Well, let's talk about that too, the consequence of having a secret to hold.
Yes.
The consequence on the individual, but also on the entire family. And I know as a counselor, you probably have experienced that a lot. So that piece is really pure in this novel, where you can see that she has put up her boundaries. She knows, and she doesn't even make any bones about it. You don't need to know that. You don't need to, we're not talking about that.
She's owning her secret without a knowledge of the repercussions because it isn't only her secret.
Right.
And I think that what happens in my counseling practice that really informed the piece was that people are holding lots of secrets in families. And they don't realize that it is the withholding of what they are comfortable disclosing is the problem. People don't have to give the entire story, and in this case, the reader will find out the story, of course,
Right.
but they get it in bits and pieces. We don't need to tell our children everything, but we have to disclose enough to satisfy that longing, that curiosity. And this issue of identity formation and what we know
Right,
and what we don't know, right, is there. So here are these two adopted boys, and one wants to know his birth story, and the other one is comfortable not knowing. And that's really true of anyone who is adopted, which is that there is a variability of interest, and it's unique to you.
Right.
So I wanted to look at that.
So, well, as a family counselor and a preventative mental health counselor, it must be scenarios abounding when it comes to what you can pick and choose from to write about. I mean,
Yes.
it must be like a think tank. So tell me how that works as far as, because I heard one time that we could all write the most amazing novel if everyone we knew was dead. Because then you could write
That's right.
without fear that you're going to hurt a feeling, that you're going to disclose the secret, that you're going to. And so it must be tenfold when you have a practice that you learn so much information and you get into the human psyche so well, and then you have to pick and choose what you can actually adapt to
That's
a
right.
novel. So
That's
tell me
right.
how that has felt or where that's led you.
It actually is less difficult than people
Oh, really?
realize,
Yeah.
because I would never reveal anything that clients have told me. But what I do is I look at what I hear thematically. So what are the themes that I hear in my practice, not what does one individual person tell me. The beauty of writing fiction is I get to make it up.
Right.
And so I do. And I don't stick to any one person's story, but I do listen for the themes. And what I've heard over the course of my career related to this theme of nature and nurture and of inherited trauma and the idea of disclosure and privacy versus full reveal of troubling details is that there is a way to do it.
Well, you definitely did it well in this.
Thank you. Thank you.
You also have included in this one of the characters, which is, and I don't want to call him evil, he's so ill. He's so ill. And how do you create a character, or is it important to give that character any sympathetic ear at all so that the reader, is it important for us to relate to him at all? I didn't want to, and yet part of me was like, well, that's his pain.
Right. Well, it actually makes me feel good that you felt that way, which is I don't want to, and yet I almost can't help it, because that's what empathy is.
Right.
And fiction is a vehicle for empathy. And so when we look at people who are in the greatest pain, and in this case, the character you're referring to, Lynne, the mother in the story, questions whether or not someone can be ill and evil.
Right.
She questions that. She doesn't answer that question because I don't know if we can.
Right.
But-
she's too close to the situation.
And she's too close, and she has been harmed, right?
Right.
So I think what's really important here is the empathy piece, which is what I try to write from as a place of empathy.
Well, you start the book with a bang. And actually, it was a wonderful choice, I think, to start that first chapter as chapter 1 rather than a prologue.
Yes.
And it set you up for that back and forth timeline, which is something that I have always loved, the ability to dribble off information in 2 sets of time.
That's right.
Because I think it not just adds to the suspense, but it gives you the clue where you need it.
Right.
And when it came to that, did you write it in the same sequence that we saw it? Like, were you going back and forth in your mind, or did you kind of formulate the whole story from the Boston end and then the whole story from the Maine end?
It was a little bit of both. I think about the way that I wanted to construct it based on the way memory works.
Okay.
So if you were to say, tell me about yourself, I don't start with, I was born, in Worcester, Massachusetts. I don't
Some
do
people
that.
do.
Some people do, but I don't. I tell you the anecdotes of my life in the order in which I think of them. And so what I wanted to do with the backstory or the alternate timeline was I wanted to present it as Lynne would be thinking about it,
Right.
as she would be examining it, as she would be wondering about it. And so I also, at the same time, and this was the challenge of this novel, was because it is set in the wilderness, I really wanted it to feel like a turbulent river that you were on. And so I wanted the story of the past and the story of the present to take twists and turns along the way so that you would almost feel that you were in the same turbulence that
swept
the
up
characters were in.
Absolutely.
So it was tricky,
Yeah.
I will say that.
Yeah.
And I wrote it mostly as I was going along, but there were times where I had to pause and say, okay, maybe this is out of order, or maybe there's a better order to give me that river feel.
Did you have to back off at any point with the information that you were giving on one end or the other? You know how when you read a book and you're so attached to one side of it, and then they swing over to another side and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm so attached to this side of it as well. Did you feel like you had to try to create some kind of even, duality with the past and what was currently happening?
In the very beginning, I had the present story happening with more frequency, and it was in the edit, in the revision, that people said to me, we need to know more about Lena and what she actually experienced, because if we're going to believe that the distance that she is holding between her sons is valid, then we need to know more. So even though I didn't want to be gratuitous about some of the things that happened to her, I also did need to reveal them.
And even though, as the reader, you don't want to go back into a horrible past, and you need to know, and you kind of do want to go back into the horrible past. Because
right.
I felt like and I mean, people that know me, when they ask me to critique their work, if it's too close to my inner horror of any kind,
right,
I can't even continue. So you did a wonderful balancing act of making us be able to see how horrific her situation was without making us look away.
Correct. And I really took that to heart.
Yes.
Because again, I'm coming back to that place of empathy, which is where I try to write from. I wanted her children, when they did know what they knew, and I won't give it away, but there's some things they learn and there are some things they don't learn. I wanted them to feel empathy for her, and it's very, very challenging for our children to see us as anything other than their mother.
Right.
I have 2 children that are grown, and I'm sure that they see me first and foremost as their mother, but I try really hard to get them to also see me as a woman who has my own backstory and my own life.
Right.
And I really wanted this story to be about the boys being forced to stop thinking about themselves and maybe think about what she went through and why she made some of the choices that she made.
Right. Well, I felt like, is it Luke?
Yes.
That was the more empathetic,
Yes.
more sympathetic to her, more protective of her, and protective of his brother. I mean, he was protective of his entire family. And actually, is Luke, so Luke was the second child in her story. So
he was the small hand
he was
that was
the
being
small
held.
hand that was being held. So that now makes complete sense also about why he'd be so much more empathetic, because he felt gratitude as well.
He did.
About the situation that he was in, where Jonah must have felt chosen.
Right.
You know, somebody came to get me and they brought Luke too.
That's right.
Yes.
And he
yes.
wanted Luke to be a part of it.
Yeah.
That connection was a strong and real connection that we learn more about as the story unfolds. But Luke feels great gratitude because the life he loves would not be his life if Jonah hadn't held tight.
Right.
And so he feels that gratitude daily. But it also makes finding out some of the reveals even more painful, because he finds out things that shouldn't have been kept from him.
Well, so Lena has the biggest secret,
Yes.
but Luke has a secret. Jonah has a secret. So
Coop has a secret.
Coop has, all right, so Coop has a secret too. Coop was a character that I wanted. So Coop was the character that the whole time I was like, are they having an affair? Are they not having an affair? Is this going, like, it was intriguing to me that she kept him at hand's length too. It looked like for the reader's perspective. And then there were moments when you didn't think that to be the case, that you thought this man knows every single thing about her.
Right.
And so we were wondering about, I say we, me and the mouse in my pocket were wondering about whether or not Coop was in the entire, in on the entire story. So that was a very intriguing thing. And then the other ancillary characters too, with the sister-in-law and the brother-in-law. And just enough about them in the beginning for us to whet our appetite to know how they would factor in. Because clearly, other than being in those opening scenes, to find out that they were factoring in later on.
right,
Yes, it was the perfect.
Well, the Coop character came to me, and I was so delighted.
Yes.
Because he's a lift in the story.
Yes.
He's a generous, kind person whose life was changed when she arrives.
And I love that arrival.
The arrival was...
It was gentle, and it was
Yes.
sweet, and he did what he... And then the quiet way he says, so do you want me to sell
help
your
you.
car?
Do you want me to help you?
You know,
Right? He
yes.
knows she needs help, and he surmises what...
But he doesn't push at her.
Right.
He doesn't, yeah.
Which is, I think, the only reason why they ever can become close and reliant on one
Right.
another, because they're both lonely.
Right.
And she trusts that he will respect the secret.
Mm-hmm. I know.
Which he does.
Which is amazing. So when you talk about nature's power to heal too, I've always felt that to be true. Like, put me in the woods. You know, there's a reason they call tree huggers tree huggers.
That's
like
right.
when you're stressed and traumatic and you can just sit out there and, I don't know, listen to a bird.
And it's a beautiful part of our country.
Yes, exactly. Like, so you painted that so well. You painted Luke's attachment to it and hers.
Yes.
Lena was very much in the right element.
Yes.
And even though she kept imagining the life she would have had in Boston had she stayed and had it been safe to stay. Because that was the other thing too, like to find out little things about what she actually gave up.
That's
It wasn't just fleeing for safety and giving up a horrible life. She had given up something wonderful as well.
That's right. She gave up a lot for her children.
She gave up a lot
Which
for her
many
children.
women do. Many
Right.
women give
Right.
up a lot of their own identity and their own promise in favor of their children. And in this case, what I wanted to examine is that selfless, generous, beautiful gesture also had negative consequences.
Right.
Which means, you know, my dedication in the book is that it's for women, you know,
Oh,
faced with
actually,
impossible choices.
That's almost exactly worded that way, and I loved that dedication for women torn between impossible choices, and that's an everyday occurrence for most
Yes, it
people
is.
to be torn, you know, by what must be done and what their other life would have looked like if that must be hadn't occurred.
That's right.
The other thing that you spoke about, or actually I've heard you speak about, is the lifelong trauma of witnessing violence, even if you're not the victim. And that's what she was trying to save her children from.
Correct.
As well. So,
We know a lot about that now.
yes.
We know that very little children, when they witness violence and there's no contextual, mature understanding,
Right.
it's even more frightening.
Right.
And that we can be, as adults, our mental health can be impaired, our physical health can be impaired by that trauma that makes no sense.
That makes no sense. Exactly. You have no context for
Correct.
it. You're only ego when you're little. You can
Yes.
only imagine that you had something to do with it.
That's
You
right.
know, when it's nothing to do with
And
you.
that, again, is what she's trying to
Avoid.
avoid.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah. No. And then the journey that we go on with the one son who's going to go find the answers.
Yes.
And there was a little breath holding with that, you know, for
Yes.
sure. Like, don't go looking for things you don't want to know, but you need to
That's
know,
right.
you know.
Well, and also Luke's feeling, which is that if Jonah is going to
Then I
go
protect
and
him,
find,
yeah.
then he's going to need to know.
Right.
And there was a lot of anger that, yes, you
Oh,
feel
you mean that he doesn't want
he
to
doesn't
know?
want to know.
Yes.
So
Yes.
here's his brother going to unravel the story, and he feels like that's unfair because
Right.
now I have to know and I don't want to.
Right, exactly. Let's talk a little bit about your teaching, because I actually was lucky enough to take a Cape Cod Writers Center Pathways to Publications class just this past April that you taught, and it was called How to Add Conflict and Tension to Your Story, which you know, the conflict and tension piece, you know, put a man up a tree, set the tree on fire, then cut the limbs off. Then that's what I feel like your story has, where you're just like throwing more onto it. Like,
I like conflict.
And conflict is the only way we grow. It's the only way that, also, if Jane met Harry and they lived happily ever after, that's kind of not a story.
That's correct.
Yes.
That's correct.
Yes.
Conflict is the heart of story.
Yes, but I also loved the fast-paced aspect of your teaching style. Like, you had a lot to say. You had diagrams and writing prompts. And when we were doing the writing prompts, I was remembering how much I loved writing prompts.
I do too.
Throw a scenario at me and then make me think about what it's supposed to look like, and I'll write my own story, and the person beside me will write their own story. But also, can you talk for a minute about the inner and outer story in each, what you're actually looking to achieve when you're writing a novel of that kind?
Yes. So I really do love writing prompts also, and I'll tell you, for anybody who's a writer out there, one of the reasons why they're so wonderful and sort of undervalued is because when you're working on your own story, you've already created constraints in your mind. But when you're looking at a prompt, you don't have any. It's coming from complete fresh eyes, right?
Yes.
So sometimes doing the writing prompt can lead you to find an opening in your own work. So they can be just helpful to write, but they can also help you to find an entrance to your own stories.
Oh, as I was writing, I just kept saying to myself, "Oh my gosh, this would make a good
use
screenplay.
this.
This could make a good, yes.
So what I talk about when I do my classes is what's called the inside and outside story, or the outside story are the events of the story, what happens, and the inside story is what's the emotional relevance or context for the character.
Okay.
So part of the reason why my domestic suspense psychological thrillers are also at heart family stories is because I pay just equal attention to both. I don't just look at the outside actions of a story and write a thriller that's a roller coaster or a river in this case, but I also think about who are the people for whom this is all happening to, and what's at stake for these people if this happens or that happens. And I really try to examine each person in the story, whether in this case there are only 2 points of view, but you really do get a sense of everyone's point of view, which is that there's an impact to the action of the story on everyone, including the smallest role in the story. So for me, the inside and outside story, or the events plus the emotions, are equally important, and I can't write one without the other.
No, it's nice also that the character-driven aspect of the story, which is kind of intertwined in the inside and outside part of a story. But the character-driven part of it is, even though you didn't write it like first person from each viewpoint, we could easily see each viewpoint. Even the sister-in-law who then had to carry another secret. It was secrets layer secrets, and so there was a lot of weight on every single player in this story.
Well, there's an emotional ripple effect in families, to friends and to extended family members, when anything traumatic happens in a family. And so I really wanted to examine that too, that ripple effect, because it does affect everyone in the story, from the sister to the brother-in-law to, really everyone, even the guests of the inn. I mean, there are even moments
Get out.
where she's like, "This is too close for comfort. I can't have these people knowing my business, and they're trying to pry." Right. And so we see that the ripple effect extends, and I find that fascinating. That's what I love about fiction, is to look at that character piece and the sort of putting the reader in the position to say, would I do that?
Right. Oh, it cemented my idea that I would never want to own a bed and breakfast or.
Although, don't you want to go there?
I wouldn't mind going there at all, but that whole, for somebody who was wanting privacy, to have that kind of life where she literally lived, doing the tours and taking people out and making sure they had everything they needed.
And working constantly.
And it probably saved her to be working constantly as well. There were a lot of surprises at the end too. Even with the actual inn itself, like how.
That's right.
Yes, exactly, and that was kind of like, oh, okay, that makes sense too.
I love the ending in the sense that I always knew what the ending was going to be.
Oh, you did?
I knew the twist, but I also knew the relational twists. There are a number of different relationships that shift the dynamic, and I knew that from the start, which was really helpful in the writing. So I knew how the young men would evolve, and I knew how certain key characters would evolve, and that really helped me to write to that point.
Yeah, well, it was wonderful. I envisioned the book, but also I envisioned you writing it, because knowing your background, all I kept thinking is, if I were having a counseling session with you and I was telling you something, and then there's got to be some little part in the back of your mind that says, oh, this would make a great storyline. like I really want you to be well mentally, but this would make a great storyline.
Well, it's really funny that you say that, because that isn't exactly what happens, but a little bit close. Because
Okay.
what I would say is that I started my career as a registered nurse, and people talk to you about their health
Yes.
in story.
Yeah.
Let me tell you what happened, right?
Right.
People introduce themselves to you through story. And in counseling, it's the same thing.
Right.
People come to you to tell you the story of their lives, or the story of where they're stuck in their lives. So the through line of story is in my career
Right.
in every way.
Yeah.
But again, it's more that I start hearing the same themes as opposed to I hear specific story details.
Yes, exactly. So you don't have to steal their story.
That's
you
right.
Just have to, you just have to steal their feelings.
That's right. It's the
Because
feelings that I'm
basically-
listening for, yes.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I know that people tend to have one thing that until you know that about them, you don't know them.
That's
and so
right.
they'll put that thing forward quite often first. What's on the plate for the next novel? Do you already have that figured out?
I do. I have a process where once a story is in production, meaning I have a contract and the book we're now getting, marketing and doing covers and copy edits and all of that, I'm well into writing another draft, and then an idea is usually percolating.
Nice.
So for me, it's kind of a bit of a cycle. And so right now, Dark Rivers to Cross is already out, and I've got a draft of something and an idea for something.
Perfect. Oh my gosh, you're just like the, all the hands.
I love
moving
it.
At one
I
time.
love it.
Well, thank you so much for being
you.
here. We really appreciate it. Thank you on behalf of Cape Cod Writers, too, for what you've done for us, too. That was a wonderful. We hope to see more of that.
Thank you. It will be my pleasure.
And if anyone would like information about Lynne's very busy world, you can access her website at www.lynnegriffin.com, which we will link to this show. And if you've enjoyed this episode of Books in the World, you can find links to this and others at capecodwriterscenter.org or on our YouTube page. And please check our website for classes and lectures and writing groups. Along with information about our annual Writers Conference, which is going to be in person this year at the Hyannis Resort and Conference Center in the first week of August. Thank you so much.